Hello. Happy Pi Day. All right. Here's the next episode. Welcome to let's try this again. Welcome to the new episode of Behind the Green Screen. As you can see, no green screen behind me. And I said in my last episode, this is episode 3, yay. But I said in my last episode, I've been threatening to share my summer reading list from summer of 1999. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I keep talking about it. I keep threatening you with it. I'm actually going to do it this time. All right. So I'm going to get this party started. Now, before I start this reading list, because I have it right here stacked dangerously next to me, but before I get started with going through these books, let me give you some background on how this list came to be. So picture it. It's 1999, and Lisa is working as a low-level clerk at PSD in the Groton subbase. I was desperate for a job, even though the job was 50 minutes away from where I lived. I still made the decision to go and take the job because it was permanent. Because I won't get into it, but it wasn't an easy road for me in Connecticut, job wise. In any event, so as a filing clerk at PSD, I have a lot of downtime because my work just basically required as service members came in, I would go through their service record, which is why I was able to go through Bernice the Marine's service record. Right? So I would just basically go through the story, go through their records, get the story, which is basically, their start and end dates, any seat times, so on and so forth, right? I was responsible for getting all that information. So in between doing all that, I had a lot of downtime. And so I would read newspapers. Back then, there wasn't a paywall that you had to get through. You could reasonably go online to the website of a newspaper and be able to read it without being forced to subscribe. So one of those newspapers that I read was USA Today. And I remember reading an article, and it was about getting together your summer reading list, and they gave out a list of suggestions, like 100 books. I think it was 100 books, all influential books from the 20th century that they said you should read. And so I went through the list, and I started just picking out ones that sort of appealed to me. Others were like, I heard about it and I've always wanted to, read it and see what it was all about because there've been so many mentions about it. And I have this thing the wrong way. All right. Because there has been so many mentions about a particular book that I was like, you know what? Let me see what the fuss is all about. So that's what shaped this reading list primarily. Okay. And the reading list was a mix of classic and eclectic. It was a really interesting list of 20th century novels, and I was like, you know what? This will get me to branch out because up until that time, I have been primarily reading like mysteries. Every once in a while, I'll branch off and read, some literary fiction, but I basically just gravitated to mysteries. So the reading list was a way for me to shake things up and not go for the familiar, step outside my interests and see what was out there. So that's what shaped this reading list. All right. So to get things started, I don't want to start with those. I want to preface this by saying I do not remember the order in which I read these books, but I do remember kind of the first book, but definitely the last book I read. I can say that for certain. All right. So let's start with, I think this was the book that kicked off the summer, but I don't think it was like part of the reading list for that summer. It was like, oh, let me buy this book and let me read it and see what it's all about. And I don't remember if it was a gift or how I got it. I just don't remember. But the first one Let me fix the desk jacket. The first book that I will discuss is Toni Morrison's Beloved or Beloved. Is it pronounced Beloved? I think it's pronounced Beloved, right? And I think I bought this right around the time that the movie came out because there was a movie adaptation. Um, I enjoyed this book, but there were certain parts in it that made you go, and it was a head scratcher. And I felt that there were questions that were not answered. And I always felt that if I went back into the book and read it again, all the questions that I had or all the holes that I thought were there would probably be resolved and I would get satisfaction. But I do remember talking about this book with coworkers and they were like, we don't get it. We don't get it. And I was like, you know what? It is a little difficult. It's very symbolic. There's a lot of symbolism and allegory and all the literary devices that you can think of are in this book. So it's a little heavy for summer, but it's a good book to read nevertheless, because Toni Morrison does know how to tell a story. I'll say that. Okay. So let me see which one will I do next? Oh yeah, I'll do this one next. Okay. So this book, I know this was on the reading list for the summer, and I can tell you right now, I did not finish it. And I'm kind of disappointed in myself because I thought this book I could definitely relate to because it takes place in the military, and there's a lot of stuff in there that still applies today, I suspect, as far as how nutty the military can get. And it doesn't matter which branch, it's all nutty, right? So here's the book. Oh, wait a minute. I should do it from the other side because you can see it better, right? So here's the book. Yeah, Joseph Heller's Catch 22. All right. Now, the reason why I know that I didn't finish is because number one, I don't remember the ending. And if you look at the spine, see where that crease is? That tells me that crease never moved, right? Because if I had, I do that abusive thing with my paperbacks in which I open it up and then I put it face down. And I did that a lot. So you can tell, right? It never got past this point. So I didn't even get I got through not even a quarter way through the book before I put it down. I guess I just couldn't get into the groove. I don't know if it's the writing. I don't know if it's the character. I don't know if it's the story, but I am willing to give this another shot. Catch 22. I really am. And I will sit and do that. Okay. I want to also say that shame on me. Normally, like bibliophiles like me, when they buy a book, they always reread it. Like I know someone from my grad school who reads War and Peace once a year. That's how much he loves that book. It's his all-time favorite book. And I don't do that, and I should start doing it, right? Especially with books that I just can't get enough of. And I will cover those in later posts. I will. So, okay, now here's the next one. This one was a difficult one for me to get through. And I think you have to have the right frame of mind and you have to sit and say to yourself, these people are not real. The story is not real. However, the story could happen and has happened. All right, we see this in the news all the time. I call this book Profile of a Pedophile. This book. And it is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. You know how this book is very controversial. The protagonist, Humbert, is convinced that this 10 or 11-year-old little girl named Lolita is kind of seducing him in his mind. And it grows into an obsession to which he kind of kidnaps her. And you see it truly affects this child. And he is relentless. And it's just very, very disturbing, which is why I call it Profile of a Pedophile. You have to sort of constantly convince yourself that this is not real. This is a book. These characters do not exist. But if you've known someone who's been a victim, then it really hits close to home and it's almost traumatizing. So I will preface this book by saying, if you have ever been sexually abused or assaulted as a child, do not read this book. This book is not for you. It will trigger you. It will trigger you, and you will see parallels, and you'll be reliving your trauma all over again. So, again, fair warning. If you have been the victim of sexual abuse as a child, do not read this book. But if you want to understand how quickly something can grow into an obsession in which it takes over this man, he could think of nothing else but this child. And it was just very, very, you kind of wonder, like, how is this what goes through the head of people who do this? Is this what they're like? Is this how it turns into them? That it turns into this obsession that they have no control. You have to wonder. All right. So there's that book. And the reason why I read it is because there was so much references to it. If you don't know, the book was banned in the United States when it came out. It was absolutely banned. I think it was 1956 because of the subject matter. Now, if you just think back in the 1950s, they weren't ready for this. You know how controversial this is now, given all the stuff that has come out in the press. And yeah, it's again, very triggering book. Now, the next one I will talk about is a mystery, but it's not like the typical mysteries that I would read. And I've heard, and I remember, I think I saw the film adaptation of this book when I used to live in New York, because in New York, before they had cable, they had the channels in which you caught the channels with an antenna. So there was channels 5, 9, and 11, and all of these channels would show old movies. Especially channel 5 definitely on Saturdays. Anybody from New York knows if you wanted to see kung fu films, tune into channel 5 after 1 o'clock, and you would see Enter the Dragon, all the really good kung fu movies, which is why there's the Wu-Tang Clan, because they saw these movies on Channel 5 just like I did, just like anybody who were raised in New York at that time. That's what you saw on Saturday afternoons. And if you wanted to see the MGM musicals like Brigadoon or Singing in any of those, Channel 9 would probably broadcast them. And if you wanted to see the old Abbott and Costello and Laurel and Hardy films, that would be Channel 11. So March of the Wooden Soldier, if you remember that one, and all the great Abbott and Costello ones, Abbott and Costello meet Dracula or something, some sort of nonsense. But yeah. And I remember distinctly the bit between Abbott and Costello and Who's On First, because I watched that movie over and over again on Channel 11. All right. So this movie, I do not remember, but I kind of remember seeing this movie, but it really didn't click until I read the book. Yes, The Thin Man by Dashiell Hammett. Dashiell Hammett, I like his writing style. I'm not a gumshoe type of reader, but I really enjoyed this. And the reason why I enjoyed this, because the characters in this novel are not your typical gumshoes, right? It's a married couple, a very rich married couple, Nick and Nora Charles. They have a dog, a terrier named Astor. Yes, named after the Astor family. And all they do is just drink and quip at each other. But they also stumble into a mystery that they wind up solving, and they become sort of like this crime solving couple that's during the 1920s, like the roaring 1920s. Okay. So The Thin Man, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, I do have The Maltese Falcon. I have not read that. I have seen the movie with Humphrey Bogart. And that's on my reading list of books to read that I bought, have been sitting on my bookshelf, collecting dust, unread and unloved. So I'm going to read that. Okay, so uh, mm, the next one. The next one it was a wild card because when you put together a reading list, okay, here's my recommendation. When you're putting together a reading list, you have to have a wild card. You have to have a book that's so far out of pocket from all the other books that you have assembled that it sort of stands out. And this one, my wild card, certainly stands out. I think I bought it before the film adaptation or before I saw it. Let's put it that way. Before I saw the film adaptation. Now, this book is by a former Rolling Stone reporter, journalist, who invented a whole style of journalism. If you're a big reader, you know exactly where I'm going. You know exactly who I'm going to talk about. All right. Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Let me tell you, oh my God. Now, you know gonzo journalism. If you don't know what gonzo journalism was Hunter S. Thompson's thing. That was his style. Because normally as a journalist, you try not to put yourself in the story. If you're reporting on a subject, you're not the subject of the story. The subject is the subject of the story. But Hunter S. Thompson, what he would do is he would put himself in the story. And so it kind of changed journalism and made it more first person perspective instead of third person perspective. And so when I read actually, here's the entire title: Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, a savage journey to the heart of the American dream. Pure fiction. But you know that this is based on some reality stuff. You just know it's based on reality stuff. But I highly recommend that you not drinking liquor while you read it. You need to go in the other direction, the floral direction, if you catch my drift, if you're going to read this book. And do not try to figure out anything. Do not look for symbolism. None of it. Just enjoy the ride because it is a wild one. Okay? All right. Now, the next two books, I'm going to introduce them side by side only because of the relation of the writers. Because the both of these writers, for both of these books, they have a history. They do. They have a very complicated history. They did make up a little bit later, but by that time they had gone so far without speaking that, the friendship that they had really wasn't as strong as it used to be. Now, I'll start with the first one. Now, for this first book, this author became famous for the film adaptation of his novella. And it stars a very, you know what, there was a film adaptation. And if you haven't seen the movie in full, you know this movie exists. You've probably seen clips of it on social media. And it's one of those, it's one of those movies that just makes you feel good about yourself. And I think it's on Netflix too. Truman Capote, Breakfast at Tiffany's. All right, because I've seen the movie dozens of times. Again, watching old movies in New York. I think I saw it on Channel 5, actually. But it's one of those things when you're young, you don't realize that it was based on a book. When I got older, I realized, oh, okay. So I included this on my reading list because it's one of those things that I was really curious about. Because I'm always curious about film adaptations, how close they are aligned to the movie. Now, if the movie took this material and really did very well with it. This book, I enjoyed Breakfast at Tiffany's, right? And I enjoyed the other short stories that were in here. Now, truth be known, it's been a very long time since I've read this, and any memories I had would be based on the movie, not what I read. But I do remember thinking, okay, the movie managed to capture the elegance because I find Truman Capote in this Breakfast at Tiffany's to be a very elegant writer. I'm kind of sad that it kind of went down south with his writing, that it got so bitter. But here is light and breezy, and that's why this is the perfect book for summer. It's the perfect book to put in your beach bag and just go, and just sit and, just put yourself in the 1960s and how hip and jazz it was. And yeah, it's one of those types of books, right? And you could look into the symbolism. Of course, the symbolism, there's always hidden meaning, but I just recommend don't try to look for meaning, just enjoy the book. Now, my next book, believe it or not, I this was not assigned to me in high school. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people who can say, "Oh, yeah, I read that in high school." I was not one of those people. Um, which is a head scratcher because I did read Catcher in the Rye in high school, so I don't understand this book that I'm about to introduce is on the same level of recognition and intensity as Catcher in the Rye, but it doesn't have notorious, you know, uh, killers attached to Catcher in the Rye, which is a really good thing because I would hate to have this book be attached to any killers. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I At the time that this I started reading this book, I was working as a secretary for a Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation in East Hartford, Connecticut. They were about to close the East Hartford office, but they were still hiring people temporarily to support the people who had to wind everything down as they closed the office because the office was basically open as a result of all the bank collapses that were going on in the late 80 in the mid to late 80s. Yeah, mid to late 80s, where banks were collapsing left and right. So FDIC were opening up field offices, and one of those field offices was in East Hartford, Connecticut, but they were winding down. So I took the job knowing that it would be temporarily because the pay was really good. And and so, it allowed me to buy things that I wouldn't ordinarily be able to buy 'cause the money was good. And, so at lunchtime, I would hurry up, go to the cafeteria, get my stuff, finish eating because I had an hour lunch, really nice, and then I would go outside, there were trees outside, and I would sit under the same tree, and I would read this book. And I remember and the reason why this book is so near and dear to my heart is because I remember I remember this moment like it was yesterday, sitting under the tree and I was reading this book. And there's a scene in the book where the whole family's sitting at the table. It's Atticus and Scout, her older brother, and her aunt. And they're sitting there and they're eating and they're having a discussion at the table. And Scout all of a sudden says, "Please pass the damn ham." And I fell out laughing. I had to put the book down and I just had a good laugh and I didn't care who saw me because I just thought that that was the funniest line with "please pass the damn ham." I guess she was, she heard the word and she was testing it out. And so she picked Thanksgiving, or I think it was Thanksgiving or Christmas to test out the word. And I just thought I loved it. It was nice to sit under a tree, hot summer. I think it was late July, early August, and just enjoy a book and like laugh out loud before it became LOL. Okay. All right. This next book wound up on the reading list because normally I don't buy books that are bestseller lists unless the review is so well written and so convincing that it makes me go and read or buy it to read it. And I think that was the case with my next book on my list because it was one of those best-selling novels that show up on a USA Today or New York Times bestseller list of the week. But I thoroughly enjoyed this novel more than I ever thought I would. The Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood by Rebecca Wells. Um, I don't remember specifics of this book because it's been a very long time since I read it. But I can tell you that the fact that I still have it, and you can tell that I saved it from near danger. I don't know if you can see that, but I saved it from near danger. Obviously, was exposed to flooding, but yeah, you can see from here. But I held on to it because it was such a good book and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was, again, one of those books that's along with Breakfast at Tiffany's, it's a very light read. You put it in your satchel for wherever you're going, even if it's to the park. This is beach beach read, park read, anywhere read, rest stop read. It's a very feel good book. All right? Very feel good book. My last one, however, is not a feel good book, but it is a very good, well written book. Now, I am not one for book clubs. I don't book clubs, no. Mm-mm. I don't like someone dictating what I should read. That's just me. But this book happened to be part of a book club, but that's not the reason why I bought it. There was a lot of buzz around this book, but my reasons for buying it is because the author is from Connecticut. Now, I if you've watched my intro, you know I'm from New York, but I lived in Connecticut for 30 years. So if you were to ask me where I was from, I will say I'm a New Yorker who vacationed in Connecticut for over 30 years. But having lived in Connecticut for 30 years, I do consider that my home. It's very difficult when people ask me where I'm from, I'll say I'm originally from New York, but I lived in Connecticut. But I have a close relationship with Connecticut because of all those years. And so when I read a book and it references areas that I've driven through or worked in, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I know where that is. And oh my gosh, I can't believe where's, so it's all of those moments that I had in this book. She's Come Undone by Wally Lamb. Wally Lamb is I believe he was born, raised in Connecticut, and he was an English professor at the University of Connecticut. And it was one of those things where, it sort of inspired me that maybe I should go and attend University of Connecticut because I really want to be a writer. Now, this book was very difficult for me to get through. No lie. And when I put it down, it took me 10 minutes to sort of untangle my mind because it was so intense. The reason why I had this on my reading list and why I am recommending is because Wally Lamb gets into the head of women in this weird, uncomfortable way. Like, no man should have that much insight into a woman. Now, let me tell you something. This is not about race. This is not a Black person's book. This is not a white person's book. This is not an Asian person. This is a book for women, period. Because the insecurities that Wally Lamb has flushed out are insecurities that any woman has experienced. Any woman. You heard? So as I'm reading this, I'm just falling apart. She's come undone. I came undone. Okay. So I recommend this book, but I give you caution. If you're a woman that has a shit ton of insecurities and things, and you're so self-critical, this book is not going to help you get over that. It might compound it. So, I'm not exaggerating. This book was really, really intense. Wally Lamb really gets into the mind of women, and the protagonist. Um, she's this overweight young girl that has all these issues and things that are going on in her life. And it was just heart wrenching to read some of this stuff because I just saw myself in these pages. So that's what you'll find. So if you're strong enough and brave enough, I highly recommend Wally Lamb. He tells a very good story. He is excellent with his characters. Excellent. Just, I would love to be able to sit down and be that in depth about the fragility of woman and her place in I'm beginning to sound like a lecturer. I'm going to stop. But in any event, so that's my reading list. So to recap, and I recommend any of these, but again, word of caution on some of them. I let you know. All right. So don't say, well, you told me to get this book and now I'm all I give you a disclaimer, caveat, cover my ass situation. I'm just letting you know. All right. So to recap, She's Come Undone by Wally Lamb, The Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood by Rebecca Wells, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, Breakfast at Tiffany's and Other Stories by Truman Capote, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson, The Thin Man by Dashiell Hammett, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, and finally, Beloved by Toni Morrison. I hope you enjoyed this episode of as I run down through some books. I hope I've made some nice recommendations for you as you put together your reading list either for spring or for summer or for the year. For the year. Why not make a reading list for the year and explore some of these books? Just again, a word of caution for some of them. I don't want anybody to be traumatized by a book because that's not what books are for. Books are there to make us feel human. That's what they're there for. All right. So thank you for stopping by for this episode of Behind the Green Screen. For my next episode, I'm going to talk about my love of mysteries and how they all came about and how I sort of started branching out and exploring other mystery writers and the fun that I had in doing that because I did find some really great mystery writers outside of Agatha Christie. All right. So you take care. All right. Stay safe because I know things are really crazy right now. But you know what? If you want to escape, go get a book. Go get a book. All right. Until next time, take care.